Let's see. All right, so 11 o'clock, so we're going to start on time. I want to check my settings one more time. We're up to 150 participants, so that's great. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. So the screen is shared, so that's what's going to be up there. Everyone is muted automatically, so we're going to run this as a webinar. So it'll be one way, but if you go to your action bar on the Zoom screen, there is a chat feature. And what Christy Stout is going to be doing is monitoring the chat for me. So I will say that I'm trying to unload as much information as I can. I believe the last 7 or 8 slides are the specific questions that you put into the survey link. So I'm going to try to run through those. We don't have all the answers yet, but this should give everyone a very good framework. So in the chat box, if you would just write any questions, excuse me, any questions that you'll have there, and then at the end, what we'll do is I'll go to the chat box, and if I've answered them, I'll not do it. If it's not about reopening, I probably won't do that, just in respect of everyone's time, and we can follow up afterwards. But I'll try to answer all of those questions. So Christy is also a co-host, just in case I lose power here at the house. Stay on the Zoom, and I'll get on my phone and come back in. Hasn't happened yet, but you never know. You absolutely don't know. All right, and I've got a little bit of feedback. So, and Christy, if you would just manage and make sure everyone's mic stays muted there. All right. Getting a little bit. All right, so we'll jump right in. First of all, thank you for taking the time to be here, taking the time to Zoom in. I know that this is one of the things I love about the Maclay community, and you've heard me talk about this before, is the dedication that we all have for our kids, their education, and the investment that we make. So thank you for taking the time. This will run probably just over an hour. I'll try to get it into an hour, we'll see. And then I'll stay on to answer those questions afterwards. If you happen to have tried to get to the website in the last hour, you'll notice that we launched our new website at 10 a.m. There's also a COVID resource page on the new website where we will take the recording of this presentation, of this webinar, and load that up as well. So if you do need to drop off or have any technical issues along the way, just know that by the end of the day, we'll have this loaded up so you can watch it. We'll probably put it on YouTube, but link it from the website. So let's talk about Maclay's layered approach to opening of 2020-2021. This slide and the quote here was something that came through one of the teacher Twitter pages that we looked to. But anyway, the upcoming school year might be one of the toughest ever to be a student or a teacher. It also might be the most exciting and revolutionary year ever. Mindset will be critical. So it is, that states it perfectly. This is going to be a roller coaster of a year, we know that. But mindset is going to be the thing that enables us to really thrive through this next year. One of the things that we talk about here at the school is to have a growth mindset. And that's very important for students and for us as individuals. And one of the words that we use is the word yet. So as we walk through this, we've been able to answer a lot of questions within the framework that we've been given. But some of those things we just haven't figured out yet. And some of those things we're going to take the year to figure out. You as a family, each one of you individually, are having to figure out what this next normal in this COVID world is going to be like. So we understand that, and we want to build flexibility into it, and we want to continue to be a great partner. So we'll walk through this. So let's talk about the guiding principles as we as a school move forward. So when we started in March with the original shift to distance learning, we knew that at that point, which was, I'm just going to say, emergency virtual learning, we focused on two things, and I reference these many times in my in my communication. We want to focus on the academics, but we also wanted to be mindful of the isolation that the quarantining, that the shutdown created for our families and also for our students. So we really focused on that. And so now we've been able to retool a little bit and think deeply about a full school year. And for us, we're thinking about this as a 2-year block of time. COVID's not going to be fixed by November. It's not going to be fixed by August 12th, which is when we're going to start school. That was our commitment back in May. We're going to stick to that. So we know that this is going to be a long journey for us. So as we think about the guiding principles that we want to filter all of our decisions through, these are some that have rang true to us and the frameworks that we work through. So one is the safety of faculty. Now, clearly the safety of everyone is important, but as a school only runs, and it only runs well, when faculty are healthy, well cared for, feel safe, and are equipped. So as we think about the policies and procedures we put in place and the expectations, safety of faculty is key. Because if they're not here to teach, if they're not here to deliver that Maclay experience, then all of this falls apart. So that's one of our big guiding principles. Parent choice is another one of our guiding principles. And these are not in rank order. These are just the big ones. So parent choice is very important. So one of the things that we know is that each one of our students is unique, back to our mission statement, the word each, but also each one of our family situation is very unique as well. So we know that going into this year, and we've already heard from some families who've said, we're going to stay virtual the entire year. That's great. And that's a family choice. So we want to accommodate that. But we also know that there are individuals or individual families who either the student or the parent or an extended family member is immunocompromised or in some way compromised, that they're at a higher risk. And they want to keep them home for some period of time, but that's undetermined at this point. We also know that based on the reaction and the sick leave or the reaction to a symptomatic student or a symptomatic teacher, we have very clear guidelines of an isolation or a quarantining or some spacing that is going to happen for that student. So we anticipated a very disruptive year. I mean, one of the things, we had a Zoom call with the upper school faculty, and one of the things I told them is, all of you should anticipate 10 days that you're going to have to be isolating at home. You should just go into the school year thinking that you're going to, maybe you have COVID, maybe you don't, but you may be around someone, and through the contact tracing, you may have to be isolated. And how do we prepare for that? And so I just say to you as families, as we go into it, we want to be very mindful that families need a choice, and we want to really push that uninterrupted education. So you can be here in a brick and mortar school, be in the classroom, be face-to-face in the same space, but you can also be at home and through, and I'll share sort of how we're working with technology so that you can peer through the window and actually be there in the space, see your friends can see you, teacher can see you, and you can interact real time as the classes are going on. So parent choice is very important for us. The third is that this is only the second revision of the COVID education progression for Maclay, and really for any school, but we'll focus on ours. So the first revision, I suppose you would say, is the emergency distance learning that we had in March, April, and May. So as we prepare the school for return for August the 12th, first classes, that's only the second revision. And then we're going to just have to continually improve that process. Right? As we all know, school has not been done this way before. So we're very confident in what we're building, but we're not done. We're not finished on August the 12th. It's going to be an iterative approach, and that's okay. That's one of the things that, as an independent school, that Maclay is uniquely set up better than any other school to be able to pull off. Then there's this the idea of marathons and sprints. So you've probably felt this in your own household, but we viewed March and April, or really the entire school year, as or the end of the school year as a sprint. A lot of energy, a lot of question, a lot of focus having to be paid. So we've looked at the summer as a little bit more of a marathon. So we're able to slow that pace down a little bit, be very thoughtful about how we're making those decisions. And then we anticipate in August, it's going to be sprint version again. And we think that you can sprint for about 4 weeks, and that's about it. And then you've got to ease it down a little bit. So we understand there's going to be this roller coaster ride of intensity, and a lot of question, and that's okay. So we just know that we can't stay in marathon mode all the time, and we can't stay in sprint mode all the time. So we want to go ahead and understand that they exist and actually put some time frames on those so that we can ease in and out of it. Now, one of the things that you'll hear, and I'll mention in a slide or two ahead, is that there's actually very few places that we go for guidance. And the American Academy of Pediatrics is actually one of them. But it was great because they strongly advocated just about 2 weeks ago and gave some great guidance for schools in general, that we have to make sure that we remember that we are mitigating, not eliminating risk for the COVID-19. So that's where we have been for months of trying to think through a layered approach. So as we think through that layered approach, I call it the Volvo principle. So when you say Volvo, and Volvo's done a very good job of being able to market this, but it's known as a very safe car. And the reason it's a safe car is because they have multiple layers of safety, from a great roll cage to airbags to lane correction to adaptive cruise. All of these things are layered on top of each other to make it a very safe car. But it doesn't eliminate the risk when you get on the road, because there's other people out there driving. You are a human being and imperfect, so the mistake can be yours. So as we think about opening the school, we were going to do a multi-layered approach to provide as much safety as we feasibly can. But we all have to understand that we may get to that Volvo level, but there's still a risk involved in that. And I think that's a broad understanding around schools in general. But we want to be very open and honest that these are the things that we want to be very transparent with what we can do, but there are limitations, and we can't eliminate all risk. All right. So the year ahead, and we want to, as we think about the energy that is out there, and all you have to do is pull up your Facebook or Instagram or Twitter feed or turn on the television, and there's a lot of energy going on right now. But so the 4 things to remember about this year is we are in the middle of a global pandemic. That's stressful. We are in the middle of a recession. That is stressful. This is a presidential election year. That's going to add some stress. And all of this is will be leveraged by various channels. So what I want you to know is that we as a school, we don't engage in any of that. You know, we've talked about this before. We are on our 100 acres. We want to keep all of that energy out. So as we think about how we filter our decisions and how we've made our decisions in the past, how we're making our decisions today and moving forward, they're going to be science-based, they're going to be evidence-based, and we're going to follow the national, state, and local guidance. So where we look for those, Centers for Disease Control, of course, so that's our national guidance, and they give guidelines, but generally those are, you have some choice in there, which is great. We have state associations and of course state government that gives direction. So I don't know if any of you have read the Florida state guidance for reopening schools. Great information in there, but still leaves a lot of flexibility for locals, for local public schools to work through. So you get some guidance there. And what the public schools do is important from a standard of care standpoint, but it doesn't impact what we do as an institution because we are able to make our own choices as an independent school. So the local Department of Health, they're the ones who really hold our hand through verifying our policies from a procedural standpoint that aligns with state and national regulations. And then local medical experts. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So when we think about our extended team and how we use the experts to be able to inform how we work as an educational institution, these are the ones that have really been key partners for us in the past and we will continue to partner. So Leon County Emergency Management, we actually have they have a weekly education roundtable that we're able to connect with institutions of higher education, the Leon County Board of Education, and what other private schools are doing. So we're able to share those struggles, hear what they're doing, they can hear what we're doing. So we're able to stay on the same page there. They've been very, very good. The local county Department of Health, excellent support and guidance from policy, an epidemiologist. They really helped with our summer program. So as many of you know, we've been running summer programs. There was strong desire for that. And that's a function that we serve in the community. So we were excited to be able to lean back into it and use summer programs to learn also our capacity, how things work. And we learned a lot. I mean, it is, if you think I think intuitively we know that it's difficult to expect a teenager or an 8-year-old to keep their hands off or to be far away from someone else. It's really difficult, really difficult. So that informs us in terms of the education, in terms of the partnership we're going to need from families, in terms of how we contact trace when someone's positive, those sorts of things. So the Leon County Department of Health, they actually have a piece designated for summer camps and school reopening. They've been exceptional. And then we reached out to TMH, and so TMH actually has a COVID team that's on the front lines, that is working daily, and we were given access to those team members and also other medical professionals that are tied to the school. So we have ongoing conversations with them, and we share our policies and procedures with them and say, okay, here's where we are, what tweaks could we make, how are we thinking about this, and their feedback has been invaluable. So we will continue revising policies with that team of experts. And then the Florida Council of Independent School and Southern Association of Independent Schools is a great extended team for us as well, because they give us access to what other great institutions are doing here in Florida, in the Southeast, nationally, and globally. So one of the great things is being able to look at schools, let's just say overseas, who are a few months ahead of us in terms of their reopening, and what policies and procedures are working for them. How is the virus reacting to those various practices that they have in place? So it's great, great feedback, great access, great experts, because we're very, very good at what we do, but we're not experts in all these areas. So we're going to defer to that science, evidence-based, and the experience of the experts. So to the layered approach. So as we think about what are the things that we can do to keep our faculty safe, to keep the students safe, to give parents a choice, understand that it's going to be a constant revision of policies as we grow, and maintain a pacing that is mindful of the social and emotional and mental health and well-being of our faculty, our families, and our students. So I want to walk through each one of these pieces. So academics. So and we had shared this earlier too, but in a Maclay system, what we believe is on campus is preferred, but not required. And that's the model we want to build, is to be able to understand that being on campus, being in a classroom, having that interaction between a teacher and a student is vital, but how can we make it not required in the context of where we are? So the challenge was, how close can we come to face-to-face class on campus if a student can't be on campus? So in the previous release a few weeks ago, we talked about the concurrent virtual classroom. So I want to give a little bit of detail on that here. And then just so you know, in the next week, your division heads will be reaching out to you with greater detail about schedules and so that you can make a better choice as to whether you're going or whether your child is going to come back on campus on August the 12th or stay at home. But we'll talk about that decision. So concurrent virtual classroom, the idea there is as class is going on campus, a student can be at home and have a window into the classroom so that they can see the teacher and their peers in real time, and that teacher and their peers can see that student in real time, and active interaction can take place. We can't think of a closer ability to get the face-to-face class on campus than what we're building here. So it's a relatively simple model. It's a very permeable model. So again, back to the parent choice and what we anticipate. So we anticipate, and I've already heard from some families who say, my child is going to be virtual learning all year. Got it. We also know that there's families who want their child to come back, but because of a risk factor somewhere in the household, as numbers go up, they may feel more comfortable numbers go up in the community, they may feel more comfortable to bring that child home for a few days or a few weeks, and then they'll be able to come back. So the way that we're working it is we're not asking you to commit to a semester or this extended block of time. In the division communication, they're going to give you a date. It'll probably be somewhere in late July. Could be, well, it depends on when it comes out. For you to let us know your intention of whether you're going to keep your child home or whether you're going to have your child here. So what's important for you to understand and sort of work through is that and here's the thing, we don't want a student ping-ponging back and forth excessively, but what we know is, let's just say a child spikes a fever, but it's for strep throat. Well, that child's going to have to be out for a few days until their symptoms go away. But the way that we've built it, that child can go home, join right into class and not skip a beat. And then because everyone's tracking the same, when they're able to rejoin the class, they rejoin and haven't missed anything. So we're building a model that can be in and out and very permeable because of the unpredictability of what's going to happen. We want to make sure that students are not, well, two things. One, we're not asking our teachers to have two separate tracks, and students can just stay connected. So that's probably going to be one of the biggest differentiators between the Maclay education and what we're building, and at least what I'm seeing in some other schools here locally, and that they're asking for a commitment for, let's just say, a semester or a full year. That's not what we're asking for. We want, back to the mission statement, each student has their own journey, and we want to make sure that we build something for it. So what are we doing to get ready for that? So technology upgrades. Internally, I believe we've invested and sped up our internal infrastructure 10 times. I believe 3 times upgrade on our external connection to the internet in anticipation of that back and forth. The two-way views, so the very simplistic version is that we're going to have a camera on a stand, a movable stand in every classroom, and then a screen on the wall so that the students at home can have an active view into the classroom so they can see their friends, and then their faces will show up on the screen so that their friends and the teacher can see them, and that's in real time. Flexible, homesick, and well sick. So we already have policies in place that when you're sick and don't feel like you can join, or you're in bed and you feel bad, well, those are going to be recorded. There'll be packets that you can do, and there'll be makeup. That's no big deal. But what we want to do is make sure that each minute that's live in class for that interaction, that student at home can join in that regular scheduled time. So seamless transition back and forth. We know that that's going to be an evolving process and evolving procedures. And we also acknowledge that the ease of that is going to depend on the age of the student. So if you are, let's say, 4th grade and up, there's a level of independence and comfort with technology there that the student will probably be able to do most of that autonomously. But as you get younger, that's a larger commitment for the family to make in terms of monitoring and getting things set up and supervision. So we understand that. So that's a part of that decision that we need to make. And so for the decision date, we've been roughly working with a July 20th intention date to let your division head know in writing, just via email. Those procedures are going to come out from your division head. We want to give you enough time to get that, so it might push back just a little bit. But again, the way that we're setting it up, whether there's, and let's just say any given class, whether there's one student at home or 6 students at home, the process in the classroom really doesn't change. It's just there's more students online than in the classroom. So the educational journey and the content and the scope and sequence can simply continue. So cohorting. This is one of the most important strategies that anyone can put in place in terms of slowing the spread or managing the spread of COVID or any other virus for that matter. But twofold purposes. So one is limiting interaction with the broader community. So if in your normal daily life you're coming in contact with 20 people, well, your exposure is going to be less than if you're coming in contact with 100 people. You know, that's just logic. That makes sense. So that works. But the true impact of cohorting is felt after someone in your extended or in your contact sphere tests positive, and then you have to contact trace back. So this is why it's very important for cohorting here on campus. So we are able to get class cohorts sometimes in the low teens, sometimes in the high teens, and that mostly depends on division, schedule, and facilities and staffing. So the way that, and just as a note, we're going to do a separate webinar probably next week that really goes into great detail about how symptoms will work next year, how we will respond to symptoms, how contact tracing works within the school. But in general, if a student or faculty member is a close contact to someone with COVID or test positive for COVID or suspects it, then what we will do is put our process in place. There's specific questions we need to ask. There's specific tracing that needs to go through to determine who the close contacts are. And cohorting is essential because if you have a cohort of 400 and that exposure could happen to 400, then all 400 have to be quarantined. But if you have a much smaller cohort and there's barriers and protections in place, then those who may need to be quarantined or isolated or who are at risk, much, much smaller. So the way that we've built it, if there's one COVID case that comes in, it's a very isolated group of individuals that we're going to have to be able to consider and make some decisions about or follow the Department of Health guidelines. But we'll get into that a little bit later. So guiding factors on cohorts, room size, schedule, staffing, class crossovers. But this is a shared responsibility. So one of the things that we know is we can cohort very, very well here on campus. But once students leave or once students go to after-school activities outside of our campus, they enter other cohorts. And we also know as a student comes to your house and maybe, two-parent household, both of you have jobs and you have your own cohorts out there, we know there's going to be this crossover. So, but again, we're going to control what we can control. And, we all need to know that there's a shared responsibility there to keep everyone safe. All right, face coverings. So face coverings are there to take care of others. So one of the things that we're going to do is really focus on the respect portion of our honor code by willingly and properly wearing face coverings for our community. Now, this is, again, guiding principles. This is about protecting our faculty because they're the ones at higher risk. At least the most recent data talks about how, at least in terms of symptoms, it's much lighter on the younger you are. So that's, as a parent, that's good news for my own children. but we also know that there's many high-risk individuals in every corner of the campus. So we want to, so from a face covering standpoint, this is very simple. Everybody that comes on campus, if you get out of the car, you've got to have a face covering on. That includes students in pre-K, everybody. So if you're indoors, you're going to have a mask on. If you're outdoors and can be distanced, then the face covering can come on. And I should have said face covering and not a mask, but very simple. Those are the guiding principles. You know, Leon or the commissioners made it a little simpler by just making that a mandate, which was great. But from a safety standpoint, everybody's going, if you're inside or if you're outside and closer than 6 feet, you're going to have a mask on. Now, what policies and procedures do we have in place to make sure that there's mask breaks? You know, a lot of schools call them chin breaks where you can pull them down. Well, we're going to spend a lot of time or as much time as we can outside so we can be able to take those masks off. But one of the things we found in summer programs is for the most part, kids took to them and they were fine. But that's one of the things that we certainly want to rely on you guys and ask you to begin training them for that, letting them know that that's okay. And, you know, I don't like making any predictions about what the government's going to do, but I doubt we will see the mask restrictions in Leon County go away anytime soon. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but at least until we can feel much safer, I believe this is going to be a reality at Maclay. And then there are, per CDC guidelines, there are ways for students with asthma or other medical conditions that we can make accommodations and considerations for. Those are going to be done through the clinic, and those will just be done on a case-by-case basis, just like we do all other accommodations here at the school. So disinfection and hand hygiene. So this is, again, very straightforward, but even though it's primarily a respiratory spread, we will continue and have been over the summer, continue being very aggressive following CDC and Department of Health guidelines on disinfecting those high touch and high frequency areas. We've already expanded staff and we'll continue to do that next year throughout the day. And basically they're just taking those high touch, high frequency areas, bathrooms, they're just cleaning those throughout the day. Also, in general, hand washing is going to be a priority. We've installed hand washing stations across campus. But again, with as many individuals as we have, you can't put enough sinks in. So, and I actually put a picture down here. They've started installing those. So we purchased about 125 hand sanitizing or hand disinfection stations. So there will be every door in and out. There's going to be one of those. And let's see. So disinfection and hand hygiene, absolutely a priority for us. So distance and density. So when we talked about distancing in general, depending on, so the American Academy of Pediatrics and the latest research there and direction is work on 3 to 6 feet distancing. So we won't talk about, what we won't have is me walking around with a ruler measuring kids' distances. But what we want to do is train them and train everyone to watch your distance. Be mindful of that. And as we set up classes and our spaces on campus, we want to be conscious of the density in the classroom and the distance that we provide. So physical distancing is essential to managing the spread. So we've looked through every classroom and removing all unnecessary furniture, making sure the desks are either spread apart enough so that feasible distancing can be attained, or, and I think this is an additional slide, we put barriers in place to make sure that there's an added layer of protection based on the age of the student and the feasibility of actually keeping them spread apart. I mean, you can look at a junior or a senior and really work with them, and it's not foolproof, but they can actually manage their space a little bit better. They're a little bit more mindful. Completely different for a first grader. And you want more interaction and group work, especially in those younger grades. So how do we put in some layers of risk mitigation there to accommodate a great education and a great experience, but still protect them? So importance of outdoor options. This is one of the things that Maclay actually has there's a great benefit at Maclay. We have 100 acres. Not all of them are great for classroom spaces, but we're going to prioritize getting outside. So getting outside in the shade, we're investing in some shade structures. We're being very mindful of overhangs and using those to get out of the elements. And obviously, if there's a thunderstorm coming in, we're not going to be having classes outside. But if the temperature's okay and we can get out of the sun, I think that's a great option and a smart option for us. But the distancing is clearly the single most disruptive impact to the daily lives of the kids. So barriers, so again, I had mentioned this 3 to 6 foot distancing as a goal. And from a feasibility standpoint, that's going to look different based on the divisions. But in general, every classroom in the lower school is going to have, it's hard to see on this slide, but there's actually a polycarbonate, we'll call it a sneeze guard, in the middle of that table, that setting there. So what that allows is for a student to actually be within that proximity, but still have a barrier and stay safe in terms of that cross-contamination piece. So barriers can be face coverings, they can be face shields, desk barriers just like this one here. And there's also directional considerations in the classroom. So when you look at CDC or other guidelines, it talks about every student needs to be sitting in a row facing the same direction. They don't need to be facing each other within certain foot distances. So that's something that we consider. And if we can't attain that, then we have to figure out some other mitigating factor. So working through that. And then I've mentioned outdoor spaces. So it's prioritized class time, break time, lunch time, outdoor seating. We've already started expanding that in the summer. We haven't really gotten to the point where we're talking about uniforms and what the kids can wear, but we certainly want to be mindful that generally students, well, let's just say in the middle school, they're changing in locker rooms to go to PE. Is that going to continue? And if not PE, but the changing in locker rooms as a group, well, we'll probably have to modify that a little bit. If a lower school is going to be outside a considerable part of the day, do we need to build in some modifications to the uniform to accommodate that? So those are things that we're still working on. So weather concerns, overhangs, and shade, and one of the, I would just say, a practical thing that we already know that we're going to do is during the school day between, let's just say 8 in the morning and 3, the typical school day, the CAR-T gym, and that's the old gym on campus, it will be converted into dining hall overflow and study hall space. So if you can imagine the CAR-T gym, just imagine 8-foot rectangle tables with 2 chairs at each table. And those are going to be available as students come to the dining hall. If they're not eating in the classrooms, if they're not eating outside, then they can come and if there's too many to fit into the dining hall, distanced properly, they'll overflow over into the CAR-T gym. So that's just an example of some of the changes we're making there. So schedules. What is a normal school day? So I'm certainly going to defer this to the division heads to give you a little bit more guidelines there, but generally you should expect a normal school day, sort of that 8 to 3. Timing within those will look different from the schedule last year because, and again, that's a little bit different per division. Pickup and drop off recommendation is that we stagger those and those happen at different locations. So one of the benefits that Maclay has is that it already has different locations for pickup and drop off. But what we may do, I'm just throwing out there for the middle school. So one option is the 6th grade may dismiss at a different place than the 7th grade or at a slightly different time. And that's okay. We're working all that out because all the divisions have to be able to work together. And we're also mindful of families who have children in multiple divisions. But from a schedules, working in time for breaks, being mindful of passing between classes, being mindful of the impact of social distance, being mindful of the fact that we need them to wash their hands more than normal, but the importance of that interaction and consistency as they come back on campus and work through it. So let's talk about screening and arriving on campus. So the CDC gives choice to institutions as to how you screen coming in. So we've worked on an interview process for summer. It's good in some ways, it's bad in some ways. The research that we've done on taking temperatures, that is not consistent and reliable enough for our purposes, and many of the institutions that did start with screening with temperature checking in the morning have moved away from it because of the inconsistencies. So we don't want to do that. So currently what we're going to do is partner with parents. And this, again, on this slide is what we shared a few weeks ago. So basically, if you come onto campus and get out of the car, you're going to need to answer no to all of these. We're not going to be there to interview you, but that's your attest. You're attesting that you're symptom-free, that this is your history, history-free from COVID, those sorts of things. And if there's any if there's anything different than this, we're going to go through the clinic. But again, we'll get into this a little bit more and some nuts and bolts on the separate webinar that really talks about how we manage symptoms, how we screen, those sorts of things. And then training and education. This is going to be very important. It's an ongoing conversation. You're going to hear, wash your hands, wear a face covering, and watch your distance. The 3 W's. You're going to hear that a lot. And it's very important with when you have 3-year-olds and 18-year-olds. And again, I have teenagers at home, so I never say anything one time and it make an impact. So you have to be the broken record about it. But this has to be a shared responsibility from our families, from the faculty and staff, and also our students. So we're going to be using assemblies. We've already engaged with some of the upper school students to help with some training, maybe training videos for the lower school and the middle school to let those younger students see the older students acting responsibly and taking care of each other. And let's see, one of the best pieces of advice on our last medical call, one of the docs just said, the best thing you can do is behave as if you are an asymptomatic carrier. So you have no symptoms, but you could be a danger to other people. So what are the things that I can do to make sure to take care of everyone around me? Everyone in my family, every one of my friends. Well, the big 3, wash your hands, wear a face covering, watch your distance. So you'll hear that a lot. So let's briefly talk about what happens when. So in one iteration of this webinar, we went into great detail. So we're going to push that again to the separate sort of health specific COVID webinar, and we'll release that early next week. But we're all asking, what happens if I get tested for COVID? You get tested, a classmate tests positive for COVID, child sports teammate from another school, how does that affect me? Son's orchestral group, teacher tests positive. All these things are reality. And if your family hasn't already experienced it, chances are you will. But there's a very predictable outcome to each one of these in terms of the responses that you can make. Each case is very different because there's a time consideration. There's a distance consideration. So each one has to be investigated and contact traced, but it is, this actual procedure hasn't really changed that much in the last few months. So, we'll work through that and share it just so it's predictable, just so we all know what's going to happen. But the other thing that we can't forget is all the other illnesses that are out there are still going to affect our community. Common cold, influenza, strep throat, stomach flu, mono, ear infection, pink eye, all of this stuff still happens. So even though we have the real issue of COVID out here, everything else is, life still happens. So we want to have policies and procedures in place for all of those things. We're able to work through a lot of that this summer, so that was great. And so what you should anticipate in that health webinar, but one of the things I did want to share a few of these things. So we're going to build a symptom decision tree for you in terms of what we expect, in terms of, okay, this is what I see, here are the people I need to communicate with, this is the time frame I need to worry about it, and this is when I can return to school. So we're going to work through all that. We'll share that in a PDF. We'll put it on the COVID section of the website just so everybody can have. But some of the constants in terms of a COVID response and in terms of how we're working through it, the definition of a close contact is very important. So what we have to understand is just because you were in, you were in an area for a short period of time with someone with COVID doesn't necessarily mean that you have to lock yourself up for and quarantine for 2 weeks. It's certainly more nuanced than that. So CDC guidelines give, less than 6 feet, more than 15 minutes, that qualifies as a close contact. A lot of it depends on what sort of barriers you had in place. Were you outside? Were you inside? How long had that individual, or how long was it between that individual's exposure? When did they know? When were they tested? So that's where the Department of Health has really helped educate us in how to make that determination. So 14 days is the standard quarantining. Again, the Department of Health gives the guidance, the contact tracing, incubation period for COVID. So when you're exposed, it's 5 to 6 days before you may show symptoms, but it could be 14 days. And that affects how you test, that affects how much virus you shed. So social distancing is key. So when we talk about what are the 3 things you can do, wear a face covering, wash your hands, watch your distance. So again, that contact tracing and the distancing when someone does test positive, very, very important. And again, the step-by-step webinars on the way. So social and emotional health, this is really important. All of us have different risk tolerances, and all of us feel differently about how COVID affects our lives, the lives of our loved ones. And based on our exposure and experience to it, we're all going to be in different places. So we want to be extremely mindful of that. So we've been working with our guidance department and other schools throughout our associations to make sure that we're prepared and ready and helping you as families help your child be ready for a transition back and the disruptive nature. They've already been disrupted, but as they go back into school, how can we help with that? So this is, you can actually Google this link here, but one of the things is if you've got a high schooler and you're thinking about college process, over 300 college admission deans sort of talked about how they're responding in terms of the application process and things they're looking for, and how understanding they are that things are really different, and it's been very disruptive. So even those institutions are being mindful that the kids, it's been an abnormal, last few months, and it's going to be an abnormal year. But really, when we talk about to our faculty, to ourselves, to our families, to our kids, we want to remind everyone that you still have control over your situation. There is, just like, we'll go back to the Volvo principle, there are very clear things that you can do in your own life to be able to mitigate that risk. You can't eliminate it, but you have control over so much. So focus on those things and take pride and comfort in that you do have control over those things. And remember your past adversities and the things that you've overcome before, and how does that relate to what you can do now? We're constantly trying to help these students and everyone in our community be resilient. So we want to focus with that. And what do families need to do to prepare your children? Talk to them about it. You are the thermostat for your children's emotional mood, how they view things. So talk to them about your decision. Make the decision of whether to come back on campus or virtual. Make that together. Help them understand how they can have control over their environment. Now, obviously that looks different for a 16-year-old and a 6-year-old, but Children take their cue from us as parents, so we can certainly help that. If your child is just completely, just doesn't want to wear a mask because they don't want it, probably want to ease them into that. It doesn't, if you're leaving the house and going out in Leon County, everyone has a mask on out there. So it's what people are doing. That makes that transition a little bit easier. And we also want to be mindful of the stigma of COVID-19. There's, everyone's at a different place with it, but again, we are anticipating that, and a few of your questions are asked, what happens when someone within the Maclay community is tested positive for COVID, or when we get our first case. We've already had our first case. That's done. But because of the layered approach, we're able to manage those and mitigate that risk and keep everyone safe as we move forward. So now I'm going to move into just some nuts and bolts questions that some of you put out there. Again, this is going to be rapid fire. Several of these are going to be division specific, but I'll touch on them really quick. All right, I've got 10 minutes to fit into my hour. I don't know if I'll do it, but I'm going to try. So before school care, lower school, are we still having it? Yes, we absolutely want to have that. We understand that that is a service we provide and a need of our parents. Where's it going to be? Not quite sure. An easy answer for me to throw out there would be in the CAR-T or in the dining hall because it's spaced out. After school care for lower school and middle school, enrichment classes, yes, we want to have that as well. We've been working on and talking through how do we keep the cohorting model that we have during the day into the afternoon. That's complicated, and we certainly can do that in some respects. We're not sure if we can do it in others, so we want to be very transparent about that. Bus transportation, we were intending to start morning bus runs this year. We're currently right now reaching back out and gauging that interest. And so some of that will depend on how many still want to use it. I know that Southwood was a very popular interest area, so that one probably will happen. The others, we're just going to see. Now, again, we want to talk to those families. The CDC and the state has given us pretty clear guidelines on how you spread people out in the buses. But again, if there's not enough people who want to use that bus transportation, we may not do it this year. And then in terms of field trips, athletic trips, those sorts of things, field trips, the default is going to be no as we start out this year. And then I'll just go into the next one, athletics, athletic teams. FHSAA hasn't determined. Now, the Tennessee Athletic Association, they've already delayed the football season. There's been schools in the state of Florida who have already canceled football season. FHSAA, in terms of how they generally behave, is they are certainly going to be reactionary, which is fine because they're waiting on regulations. They want to give it as much time as they can. But from CDC guidelines, from state regulations and state guidance, we're going to continue to follow that isolation protocol. And I mean, currently, only under certain circumstances are you able to even share equipment. So and I don't want to get stuck here, but take a contact sport and take cross country. Those are two very different sports. And one, you're probably able to socially distance and check those boxes of keeping those kids cohorted and safe than you can a contact sport. A lot of conversation about that. We're just going to follow the guidance and make the best decision we can, keeping our faculty safe, keeping our kids safe, and giving parents a choice. Club meetings, middle school and upper school and school experiences, a lot of those are either going to have to be socially distanced or they're going to be virtual. But we believe those are an important aspect of the education. Lunch, location, menu option, breakfast, all lunches that are provided by Marauder Meals will be boxed lunches. So gone are the days of going through line and sort of picking these options. So we'll have a menu as we get closer. We'll probably switch over to a pre-purchase option. So you can bring your own lunch, or box lunches will either be picked up by class, by individual, or maybe even delivered, depending on grade level. In terms of location, that's part of the CAR-T gym overflow because we have to spread the kids out. It's going to be important to get the kids out of their classrooms. Also expanding outdoor seating. We're getting very creative with where the kids can have lunch. So we're trying to continuing that. Breakfast, not sure if we're going to offer breakfast, but it'll be in the same sort of box. You can come in and grab that. Can parents enter the buildings? This is probably going to be the biggest shift for a lot of parents. Your freedom to enter the buildings will absolutely change. I'm not telling you that you may not enter the building, but it's going to be much more controlled. Gone are the days in the lower school when 150 parents walk their children all the way into class and sort of hang out. We've got to be able to protect those cohorts, and every exposure that adds into that exponentially breaks that cohorting model. So we absolutely want to maintain that connection, but there'll be a policy and a procedure in place for you to enter the building and have that interaction. But that'll probably be division specific, so that'll be coming out. Do students have to wear masks? Yeah, we talked about that. Inside, yes. Outside, if you're socially distanced, no. What will physical education look like? A lot of outside time. If you are under 5, and yep, everybody's wearing a mask, even in pre-K. Nuts and bolts, okay, question. How many hours a day will they be online if they are virtual? So what we've designed and what we've modeled out is that when you would be in class, if you're on campus, that's when you're going to be zoomed into class. But if you think that'll look a little bit different, depending on the division, so I'll kick that to the division level. What if my child is sick and cannot attend virtual class? We'll fall back to the other. All those classes are going to be recorded so they can make that time up when they're able. What if my child has to be quarantined? Again, they just fall into Zoom classes. Zoom or Teams are the programs that we use. Can we move in and out of distance learning? Yes, you absolutely can. Again, we don't think it's healthy for children to just sort of ping pong back and forth. We don't want students to feel like they can just wake up and, oh my goodness, I've overslept and I oversleep every Monday, so I'm just going to Zoom in. That's really not what we're after. But we have made it very permeable so that you can go back and forth. But there'll be some regulations that we have there and some guidance. Can we move into how will testing be done, lower school, middle school? I'm going to assume that means academic testing. We did that in distance learning. It's absolutely, we can do that. Those will just be modified for those who are virtual. If I elect for distance learning, can my child participate in sports, drama, music after school? Yes, they absolutely can. What happens to classroom instruction where a teacher goes into quarantine? So the way that we've modeled that is, and also I'll just acknowledge, I know I'm 57 minutes in. If anybody has to go at an hour, just remember this is going to be recorded and we'll post until I'm done with all the questions. So where was I? So what happens if a teacher has to be quarantined? So what we're making more robust is our substitute ranks. We'll be posting a job description shortly on the employment page. And I don't know if this is where we're going to end up, but the idea in terms of title, but the idea of a relief teacher, a teacher that's highly mobile, highly flexible, that's a full-time teacher that just knows that they're going to come in every day, so that we can have teachers who are trained in our health and safety regulations, trained in our technology, know how everything works, so that when a teacher needs to be quarantined or is sick, because we normally have substitutes, that'll be our first go-to. And let's talk about teachers. If a teacher is quarantined and healthy and they're well, then they can do what I'm doing right here. Because each classroom is linked, then the teacher can come in and give their lecture. We will have to have a substitute in the class to manage classroom, or to do classroom management, to manage material, those sorts of things. But the teacher, the way that we're setting it up, the teacher can keep that connection. and keep that content going. All right, will the students rotate classes or the teachers? So the way it's designed now is that the students are going to stay in their class and teachers are going to rotate. All right, will there be assemblies? There will be assemblies. Again, if we can, depending on the size and the spaces, they'll either be virtual or they'll be face-to-face. I would say most assemblies are generally, those are going to be large groups of individuals, so most of those will probably be virtual. Will there be parent open house night? In some way, shape, or form there will be. I cannot imagine that we're going to try to get 200 of you in the CAR-T gym for the opening of school. That would simply be irresponsible. So I would say they're either going to be virtual. Well, virtual is going to be the default. But then as we think about opening school back, probably by appointment, coming in, meeting with teachers, following social distancing, following all those guidelines, that's probably an option. But each division may do that a little bit different. What about SAT, ACT, and PSAT testing? We've been testing PSAT on campus for years, and I know that we're working in getting SAT and ACT prep in the high school for many of the grade, or several of the grade levels, and but they will continue. The way SAT and ACT testing happens, it is socially distanced. However, AP testing went virtual this last year, so we'll see how all that plays out. We will react to what College Board does instead of in terms of SAT. Will there be enrichment or flex classes in the upper school? Yes, it will follow the same model as just the normal schedule and classes. Can they leave for lunch? So next year, or in previous years, seniors have been able to leave for lunch. This year, I believe juniors and seniors will be able to leave. There'll be certain policies and procedures there in terms of what they can do, where they can go, and how they can do it. Will there be study hall and MARC? MARC is the Maclay Academic Resource Center. That is free tutoring in the afternoons for our students. Yes, we will continue to have that. What if they need to stay after school? Again, we want to have after school options for you. What if my child isn't handling stress well? Absolutely, we need to stay tuned to that. But again, during the school year, always contacting your teacher, using the guidance office, talking to the division head so that we can team together and make sure that we have a constant message and really work through what's stressing. What is it that is trigger for your child? And what are the strategies and scaffolding that we can put in place to help them work through that? All right, if FHSA allows athletics, what procedures are in place to prevent an outbreak? Just so you know, even if FHSA allows athletics, we still have to decide what we will do and if we will participate. And again, we're going to go back to our guiding principles. We're going to go back to the CDC. We're going to go back to what science and evidence is there. And we're going to talk to our medical professionals and say, okay, and we'll probably take it sport by sport and just see how that interacts with us at that time. Will fans be allowed at games? I hope so. If you can socially distance, most games are outside. There are some indoor games, but you can go indoors. There are capacity regulations for gatherings, but if you can get socially distanced and we're doing everything, that should be a choice of yours. All right, where do I go with my questions? Over the summer, I'm just going to, I'll say your division head is your best option. Obviously, I'm available. And from a safety standpoint, Nancy and teams in the clinic, from an academic and scheduling procedural standpoint, those division heads. Let's see. How are you handling substitutes? I had mentioned that we're going to have a lot more substitutes, or at least the pool of substitutes is going to have to be deeper. And then we're probably going to hire 1, 2, or 3. We're not quite sure how many, but we're going to need to hire some permanent subs to be able to make sure that when teachers are in and out, we're able to have a quality educator, a trained quality educator in the classroom. Will parents be notified if someone at the school tests positive for COVID? Only if your child is determined to be a close contact and there's any concern on your side. We will not be sending out emails letting you know every time someone tests positive for COVID. Under what conditions would the school return to full-time distance learning? That's a great question. It would, so the reason, I'll back up just a little bit. So Leon County, what Leon County Public Schools do, sets a standard of care for all schools in the area, okay? So if the public schools close, that does not mean that we have to close. But we look at the reason the public schools close, because some of those don't necessarily relate to why we would close. For example, if there is a hurricane coming, public schools will close generally. Public schools will close a day before weather gets bad, because a lot of public schools are shelters, and their parking lots are used for emergency management vehicles. So they have to get people out in preparation. Well, we don't have that issue. So that's always one of those questions that we have to answer. So we're going to watch the data. We're going to follow local guidelines. And if it's determined that full-time distance learning is the best option for us, we'll go at that time. The way that we've worked so hard with this layering, we should have a very durable model to keep the school open regardless of what's happening in the pieces. Some people have asked, well, what percentage need to be quarantined before you go distance learning? We're not going to put a number on it. We don't have a number for that. So we're just going to make good decisions following our framework along the way as we learn more every day. Are you considering clear masks for teachers? Yes. How will non-sport activities be impacted? Again, if it's non-sport activity in the afternoon, again, like clubs, we want to have those, and we will either have them in an area that can be socially distanced and safe, or they'll probably go virtual. Will there be back to school meet the teacher events? I'd mentioned those options before. How many of these decisions are based on the governor's new order for all schools to open? 0. We've made these decisions before that. Again, state regulations, as an independent school, when the governor made the emergency order, then we fall under that, well, I'll just say legally. But in general, we use the state agency's direction to inform our policies and procedures. But in terms of our decision to reopen because of what's happened the last week or so, no. What about ordering books for the upper school classes? I know they're working on that. Once the schedules are done, then books can be ordered. But one of the things that we know is manufacturing has been impacted by COVID. So we are already anticipating the first month of school is going to be, some accommodations are going to have to be made from a teacher standpoint. How will physical education classes work? They're being very creative, and there's been a lot of professional development done across the nation on this. You know, how do you play certain games without sharing balls and material and effects? But a lot of those are going to be outside. They'll stay socially distanced. That'll be great. And then if the weather's bad, they'll just do it in the classroom. Will there be expectations of or exceptions for high-risk children to certain programs? We'll handle that just like any other accommodation that we have at school. All right, we'll move through. When will we receive details about schedules? I would anticipate you're going to receive something within the next 7 days from your division heads. And I think you'll get emails and then also webinars like this where they can sort of talk through, and those might even be grade specific or sort of group grade specific. Will periodic COVID testing be mandatory? No. Unless some guideline changes, we will not be doing that. Will class changes be staggered? Maybe depending on divisions, just to manage that crossover time. How will lockers be assigned? I'll just say mindfully in terms of how the schedule reacts so that we don't have just big groups of kids on top of each other. Will there be temperature checks? Only if symptomatic or something we're worried about. Again, we'll talk about that more in that other webinar. My child has asthma. Will he have to wear a mask? We'll have to find, so that'll go through the clinic. There are CDC guidelines that we want to be mindful of those things. So that's going to be a one-on-one conversation to see what other mitigating factors we can put in place. Can the school establish a specific spot on the Maclay website that links? Yes. So on the new website, there will be a link probably on the main website that has COVID. If not, I believe it's under Campus Life. How will parent volunteer? My Zoom toolbar covers up the rest of that question, but how will, so parent volunteer, that's going to be very different. You know, I was thinking yesterday, how is Donuts for Dads going to work? A lot of the things that we feel are normal and are central to what that Maclay experience is and that rhythm through the school year, they're going to be altered. Absolutely. We look forward to getting back to those, but it may be 2 or 3 years before we're able to get back to whatever the next normal is going to be. All right, last few. Will you be following Leon County school system in regard to reopening? Nope, we do our own thing. We're opening on August the 12th. Are you locked into one learning modality for a semester or a year? I think I mentioned this earlier. The way that we've modeled it, we're going to ask for your intention so that we can plan accordingly. But the way that we've modeled it is so that the classrooms are pretty permeable, come and go. And then we're gonna learn as we get into this better guidance for families. We're going to see how kids react to it. You know, the coming and the going. So we'll get better at that as we go. But no, we're not going to ask you to lock in for any period of time. How will lunch be handled for the high school, particularly 9th grade? You know, it'll be boxed lunches. They'll be picked up, and then, you know, I'll defer to Charles for any great details, but I would say as long as they're seating on the inside in the dining hall or the car tea, they can sit there or they can sit outside. High school, usually a lot of them actually sit outside for their lunches anyway. And then the last two pieces is just know that as we move through this, we're constantly monitoring what the national, state, and local officials for that latest guidance. I hear a lot of people say it changes every day. Well, there's new data every day, but a lot of the policies and procedures and the enduring understandings that we built our model of reopening on, they don't change every day. So we're able to at least, and of course we've been working on this for months, we feel great clarity and great confidence in what we've been able to build. But we are watching for that new data, and so we should anticipate some tweaks along the way. But what I've presented so far, this is a great layered approach of providing as much security and safety in the scale of a Maclay model possible. But ultimately, you've heard me talk about partnerships before, but I think we all have to be responsible for our Maclay community. And that means I have to act differently, parents have to act differently, students have to act differently. So I want to thank you for joining the webinar. I'm going to jump over here to the chat feature and just look through questions real quick. Since Maclay has 3 different sections, are there different safety? Sorry, I'm reading as we go. Are there different safety procedures for division, especially since we're trying to cover cases? So different safety procedures, I will say from a division standpoint, based on classroom size and schedule, there's some tweaks and differences to how the things are laid out. But in general, the underpinning of the guiding principles are the same. So one of the things, and we've shared this, the division directors have shared this with their faculty. So what we want to work through over the next 5 weeks is faculty by faculty, classroom by classroom, how is this working for you? Because just like there's parent choice, and each student and each family, we also want to be mindful that each one of our faculty members has a unique situation as well. So again, if faculty safety is important, then we want to make sure that we make reasonable accommodations there as well. These cases today, if the decision made based on the numbers you're seeing. Yeah, okay, that's a comment. The way the numbers are looking in Florida right now concerning level of virus and the high statewide mandate, consideration of the comment, it could be tragic to the U.S. as a whole. Paragraph 6, all right, I'm looking through for questions with regard to COVID state government. It's consistent recommendations, health department, which entity recommendation? Okay. So here's a good question. So which entity, and so you've got national, state, and local, which entity's recommendation carry more weight with regard to school policies? Consistently, it's local. So generally you've got the national, and that's very guiding, or it's more guidance. And then the state carries another level, and at least what, in my interaction and consumption of what we've been getting in terms of the Florida Department of Education and the governor, is they're really pushing all that down to local. So our local Department of Health, because they're the ones who are going to be holding our hand through it. That's, I would say, generally, their recommendations are going to be there. Upper school teachers rotate rooms instead of having, I'm going to defer the schedule question specifically for upper school to Charles. How do rights and privacy play the role of concurrent? Right, so one of the things is in terms of privacy rights and sharing of our information. So we're working on those policies so that anything videoed in the classroom is proprietary information for Maclay and should not be shared. We take the classes. So currently, and as we went into the concurrent, so the short answer is yes, we'll take the classes, and which we did that back in the spring. Florida's now the epicenter. Yeah, so just COVID, we diagnosed the strep throat. It's only strep. Let's go. Okay. Well, pre-K children. Yeah, I answered that. How your testing happened? So there's some question here about COVID testing. I hope that testing expands where it's more available and is a little bit faster. That would be great, because currently, speaking with someone who took a test yesterday, they were going to get their results back in 10 days, which really it extends past when at least this individual, because of the incubation period, they'll be clear of COVID by the time they know if they had COVID. So that's one of the challenges in terms of that. Question here, I think I answered that in terms of masks. So yes, if you're in class, you're going to have a mask on. Will there be dining options for purchase in the dining hall, or will lunches have to be packed? Everything's going to be packed in boxes and picked up. So there's no variability. There may be variability in terms of you can have box A, box B, and box C, but there's not going to be walking through a line and being able to choose. We're not going to be able to do that. Question here, how do you know if parents are being honest in terms of giving them Tylenol? Education, trust, and a lot of pushing. You know, kids are, so this is what we do. And children are usually really honest in terms of whether somebody gave them some Tylenol to feel good, to feel better that morning. I hope, and again, hoping is not a strategy. I do hope that through communication and education and a lot of work, the general level of care for the Maclay community, if you're a part of the Maclay community, can help all of us. Those that decide to be in-person learning might also be people that don't ascribe to masks or believe in the virus. How does the school handle this in educating parents and lessons at risk? So one of the things we're going to educate about what we do. We're not going to take on the challenge of convincing someone of something that, whether it's mask or the safety or treatment for COVID and all that, we're not worried about that. Whether you want to do this or not, if you're going to come onto campus, you're going to do it. Let's see. Easing the kids into mask wearing, I think that's smart. parents, go ahead and start doing that. What's the plan for classes after Thanksgiving break? We just continue as we have been. Again, the way that we've built this model, if you as a family feel that there's risk out in the Leon community, then go virtual. And there's no stigma for doing that. As the large breaks come, we're going to educate. I'm not in a position to require. Someone had asked the question early on, can you require everyone to self-quarantine for the 2 weeks before school starts? We're not really in a position to be able to do that. I think we all should be mindful of our cohorts that we go with, but we can control what we can control. And give parents choices beyond that. Will parents be able to walk children into the classroom in the mornings or the afternoons? I'm going to say you need to prepare for the answer to be no. I'm not going to say that you can't even get out of your car, but as we think about the lower school, and they haven't worked through all of that, I don't believe in the lower school, but we have to figure out, and for those of you in the lower school, I'm out there opening car doors. That's not exactly recommended. So how I do that, or how I have done it, is not recommended. So we will build some policies and procedures with that. Will there be a plan to keep those students accountable? Will there be a plan to keep those students accountable who do not follow policy? Absolutely. Will teachers be required to disinfect? So there will be some shared responsibility for disinfection for students and for teachers in terms of the classroom. So and there's some guidance out there from CDC and the state for that. Missionary education. Will refunds be given for lunch money still accounts from last year? Yes, I would just contact the business office for that. How can we encourage students to participate in athletic teams yet still maintain cohorting? So how can we encourage students to participate in athletic teams yet still maintain cohorting? It's a great question. I think that's something that all schools are trying to figure out at this time. And one of the things that I've shared with our athletic director is he has to prepare, and the coaches need to go ahead and start thinking through, what does it look like if we end up that this season gets canceled? Can we build an intramural program? Because there are really important developmental lessons to be taught and experienced by being on a team and competing as a team. So we haven't figured that out yet, but a lot of other schools haven't either. Let's see. If the class is outside, how will they join virtually? So we have expanded our wireless network. So everything but, if you're familiar with the campus, every part of the main campus except for the very back field is wired for Wi-Fi. So the teacher will have a device out there if they're outdoors, so they'll be able to be connected. And then what platform for digital learning? Our learning management system is Schoology. How are we rotating teachers from upper school classes? And so I'm going to defer that to Charles. He will be able to answer that question. That's upper school specific about scheduling. When will class teacher assignments for kindergarten be sent out? When can we meet the teacher? I'm going to say it'll probably be August before that happens. I can't speak for Susie. I know one of the things that they're trying to figure out is balancing. So a lot of thought goes into the dynamics of the classroom and the dynamics of the teachers. But an added dynamic this year is how many of those students are going to choose to be virtual for the entire year, because some families have already made that decision, which is fine. So what we don't want, or that adds into the balance, because we don't want one class with 4 students on campus and 15 students at home, that sort of thing. So, but I think it'll probably be August before that happens. Let's see. How are we? Okay, sorry. Thank you for those kind words. Do you have any plans regarding external programs like music? So We haven't gotten there yet, but we're going to follow the same guidelines. One of the things we started in earnest an orchestral program yesterday, and there's some guidance out there in terms of music classes and choral classes. It's probably a robust use of polycarbonate sheets or sneeze guards. That's one of the things that we were able to do is we have someone here on campus who I'll just say I'll akin him to MacGyver. He can do absolutely anything. So we've been able to purchase our own polycarbonate sheets, and we're actually bending them and custom making them for each class and each use. So as we move through, we do have strategies for tutoring, and I think there'll be options. In terms of how Stubbs Music usually works, where they come and pick up the kids and take them off and bring them back, I don't see how that's going to work, so maybe that has to come onto campus. Do you have any plans? Sorry. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Will parents be able to submit curriculum-related questions that will be addressed during? Oh, yes, absolutely. So, so the question was, will parents be able to submit curriculum-related questions to division heads that will be addressed during division-specific webinars? Yes, absolutely. And if you have specific questions now, feel free to email them now. I'm already receiving emails individually and responding to those. Division heads are as well. What's going to change in the high school to limit the amount of people students are in contact with? Again, contact with any students. We're going to be able to control what's happening here on campus. One of the things that we've really wrestled with is being able to, and education is the best thing that we've been able to do at this point, is really work with families and students to understand that when you leave our gates, it's really important that you continue to be mindful of your 3 W's. Wash your hands, wear your face covering, and watch your distance. Can't wait to see my snazzy face mask choices. Thank you. I will get to work on it. How will cohorts be determined? Will consideration be given to friendships? Will the students have a say? I'm going to say that that's a great question for divisions, for the division heads. Each one of them has their own methodology for that. Thank you for everything. Thank you. Should we contact the new AD with any sports-related questions? Absolutely. So Harold Hilliard's, he's on campus, he's working. You know, the Maclay email addresses are not complicated. H. Hilliard, J. Milford, C. Beamer, all of those. In particular, any plans for the music program through Stubbs? So I'd mentioned that. So in terms of all of the programs that we had in the past, we're committed to finding a way for them to fit into this system. We just don't want to violate the system to be able to get there. Will Maclay provide masks, or should parents order like uniforms? So you need to get your own masks. So Maclay is requiring them for our employees, so we will provide options or provide a few to the employees, but we're going to treat them like we treat the rest of the dress code. They need to fit these criteria, but you'll be able to provide your own. I will defer that on to the division head to make sure to determine those dress code regulations, but a mask is in a way a medical device, so we're not going to require, we're going to give some guidance and follow CDC guidance in terms of what that needs to be. How will PE work if you decide virtual learning? So that'll be a little bit different based on what the PE or what physical education is doing in class that day and the age group. It may be that there are individual lessons and workouts given to virtual learners that then happen separately if it doesn't quite work into what's happening with the class. Let's see. Thank you for the prep. Thank you. Thank you so much for your efforts. All right. That is the last question that I came through. So please clarify, would masks need to match uniform color code? I'm going to defer that to, you know, my answer would be yes. That way they, just because I like clean lines and everything to match. I'm going to let the division heads give some thought to that in terms of providing some individuality for the students. Again, we want them to see these as, one school of thought is, well, just say that they're uniform and require them and that's it. And that's simple. And in the lower school that may work, but in the upper school that wouldn't work. So I'm going to kick that down to the division level, but we'll certainly figure that out. I will tell you that just from a faculty standpoint, it had crossed my mind to just say, okay, we're going to get the Maclay blue face coverings with the Marauder head. Faculty, you're going to have to wear them. But we give faculty the choice to work within professional, in terms of choosing their other clothing. So we're going to provide it for the faculty. I'm going to kick that one down to the division head to make sure. That. All right. That was the last of the questions. We're an hour and 30 in. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for the time. Again, we'll, as soon as I'm through here, I'll stop the recording. We'll post this. Any specific questions, obviously you can email me. I'll pretty good responding about what I can. I'll defer to the experts that work for me that may know a little bit more of the nuts and bolts about some of the other things. And then I would just, if anyone asks you about this, obviously they can hit the recording, and we'll be doing the same webinar on Monday afternoon, I believe, 3 or 3:30. But we will, you should anticipate more webinars along the way. One of the things that we, or at least I believe, is that I could get all of this in a big email, but I wouldn't be able to get across the whys and go as deep as we can just in an hour and a half webinar. So I'm sure I will see you again here on a webinar Zoom call at some point. And I'm sure you will see me. And we are, I believe, 33 days until August the 12th. So we're about to get into that sprint mode in a couple of weeks. But thank you for the trust. Thank you for the work. We feel very confident that the model we have gives the safety for our faculty and the choice for the parents to still deliver an excellent education for your students. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.